Welcome to the Raw Spotlight podcast, where we feature inspiring leaders in the B2B space and share their unique stories. Let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Ops series. I'm Stephanie Rodriguez, your host, and if you're obsessed with the behind-the-scenes magic that keeps businesses running smoothly just as much as I am, then you're at the right place. This podcast is all about the conversations with the brilliant minds who make things happen, our operations leaders. We'll dive into their journeys, their strategies they swear by, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Now, whether you're an aspiring operations leader like me, or a seasoned professional, or you're just someone who's, really wanting to hear how a business makes things work, then this podcast is for you. So let's get started with this Ops series. Now, this episode is brought to you by Ready Artwork, where we deliver uniquely tailored B2B digital marketing services to facilitate the long-term growth of your business. At Ready Artwork, we combine data-driven insights with innovative design to help your business thrive in this digital age. From SEO to digital advertising to web development and email marketing, we have experts who help companies uncover growth in unexplored and extraordinary ways. So to learn more, visit readyartwork.com or get a free proposal and let Ready Artwork discover your full potential. Now, before we dive into today's episode, I did want to give a quick shout out to our last conversation with Dr. Jeremy Wise, who is co-founder of Rise 25. We've had some awesome discussions about how podcasting can be so much more than just a marketing tool. It's a powerful operation asset as well. And a fun fact about Dr. Jeremy Wise, he actually helped connect me with our incredible guest today, Diane Mentzer. So thank you, Jeremy. And for today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Diane Mentzer to the Ops series. So Diane is a business operations advisor and COO coach who specializes in helping businesses create structure, scale effectively, and achieve operational clarity. With over 2 decades of experience as a second in command, she knows exactly what it takes to transform chaos into a well-oiled machine. Her work has helped companies from solopreneurs to well-established businesses build stronger leadership teams, streamline processes, and grow in a way that's both strategic and sustainable. She's also been featured and continues to be featured monthly on COO_WORLD magazine and is passionate about helping COOs and operations leaders step into their full potential. Now, whether you're an entrepreneur trying to build an operational foundation or an aspiring operations leader, and again, a seasoned pro looking to refine your approach, I know Diane's insights are going to be very valuable to you. So, Diane, welcome to the Ops series. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm really thrilled to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course. So, before we dive into it, I hope I did cover what you do, a little more about your experience, but I want to give you the opportunity to also introduce yourself.
Well, I think you covered it really well. I'll say one kind of fun life story kind of little piece of it is when I was 19, I'm a born operations person. It's just like what I do all my life. It's what I do. And when I was 19, I was, going to college, and I came home one night and I told my parents, I'm like, I figured out what I want to do. I want to go in, help companies get set up, and then just kind of come back in and check on them. And at the time, I thought that was like management consulting, but it's really not. It's coaching and advising. And I kind of, got into the work world and forgot about that conversation completely. And then last year, as I was working with one of my clients, it kind of popped back into my head, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing exactly what I said I wanted to do when I was 19. But at that time, I had no idea what it even was. So it's just kind of funny how life works sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and it's great to reflect, where you were back then, and just how much you've accomplished with that goal, and not even realizing it until you're
Right.
well. So that's amazing. So you mentioned before you are a COO coach. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. So, how does that work for you? So when does a company know, do I need a COO or do I just need better systems? So what advice do you give someone trying to figure that out?
That's a super, super great question. And I have had clients who kind of come to me thinking they might need a COO and wanted to talk about it. And were like smaller or solopreneurs or micro businesses, and they really just needed a really solid project manager to come in, with very similar skill set, not that extensive business growth piece, but to just get a handle on what was going on, get everything running smoothly. And that role is still so essential, even when you have a COO, because you don't want to be paying COO rates and then have them doing like, tactical project management, ops director kind of work. So it benefits the company in two ways, because a lot of times a business owner hasn't really thought about handing off yet. When you've grown your business, you've been doing it all, and you're like, okay, now I need a COO. But if you bring somebody in right away, before you've figured out as a CEO what you want your role to be, what you're comfortable handing off, what you want to hand off, what you love doing, what you want to let go of, when you bring that COO in, especially an experienced COOs who's expecting to come in and hit the ground running, and you're not ready to let go of anything yet, it's going to be a really frustrating experience for you as the business owner, the COO that you brought in, and your team, because it gets really confusing for them. And I talked to someone at one company where they really had a revolving door. They had 3 different COOs through within a short period of time, really because the business owner hadn't really thought through what they wanted to keep doing, what they were willing to let go of. And they felt like somebody was coming in and telling them what to do. And it just really was a tough relationship. And that's what's so important to me, is that relationship and the working together, because the magic really happens, and the exponential growth they're able to achieve is when they're working together in sync and in harmony. And so that's a part of what I focus on, and a lot of that for a growing business. So, the business owner's doing everything. It's like, figure out who inside your company, you probably already have somebody that you tend to hand things off to, that you like to lean on, that you trust. When you go on vacation, it's like, oh, go to that person. That thinking about it more consciously, defining your roles, starting to level that person up into that senior ops leader on your team, who can be that person that keeps everything running smoothly and partner with you in that way. And then when you do bring in a COO, whether it's a fractional or full-time, they actually have you both benefit from that, because it's going to help level up that ops leader even more. And because they're getting that guidance from somebody who's been there and done it and grown the businesses, and that's fractional or full-time COO can be more of a thought partner for the visionary and entrepreneur, and helping them bring their company to life, really helping them think through, okay, how, here's your vision, how do we make that a reality? And then having an ops leader who can help with the execution of that. So it really depends on the stage that the business is in, and the mindset of the business owner or CEO really influences what type of support they need. And there's some great free assessments that sort of help them also figure out, what it makes sense to keep, and so they help find that puzzle piece that's the perfect fit. They complement each other. Having that complementary skills is really important too. If they're leaning on somebody else who's in the company who's also a visionary type, you're not going to get that ops progress. You're not going to get those systems in place. And until they really think through roles and clarify who's doing what, and have everybody have that shared picture, it's really hard to put consistent processes and procedures in place, because things are always shifting.
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned there's a couple of things in there that were just, great points. I want to bring it back to how you mentioned, okay, so you have your CEO, and he is or she is your visionary. And they usually are just very big picture, right? You mentioned before, I've seen, a couple of your podcasts that they throw out an idea and they just want to run with that. But then you need someone like a COO to ask the questions. And it usually is like a million questions of, how are we going to try to get this done, and be more detail oriented. And you called them, what did you call them? Not executor, but a,
Was it the integrator? Integrator is a term from the entrepreneurial operating system. So
Yeah.
they kind of integrate things, but yeah. And that's a generalization, but most entrepreneurs and lots of small business owners are those big picture visionaries. But it's one of the things that makes finding the right COO, like there's no standard description, because there are business owners who are more of that ops person. And then what they might need in a second in command is somebody that maybe is a little bit more out there, who wants to be the face of the company. And that's not your typical COO. So it's really important to understand, to start with the understanding of what the business owner wants. But yes, you're right. And another challenge often is that visionary type of CEO, business owner, will share an idea that they've been thinking about for months with the same energy and enthusiasm as something that came to them in the shower that morning, and they haven't thought about it all. And you don't really know until you dig into it. Is this
Yeah.
something that I'm supposed to follow up on and implement right away? Or is this something like, hey, I had an idea, let's think about it, let's talk about it next week when we meet? It just kind of happens fast, and you're like, okay, oh, they said it, go. And so a lot of times, especially somebody who has come up from inside the business and hasn't really studied the different ops system and the different things that are out there, and maybe even understands that you guys are speaking different languages, will always be like, oh, okay, drop everything and do that. And then they're like, why aren't these other things done? Well, I dropped everything to do that. Well, that was just an idea I had in passing. I just meant, think about it and let me know. So being able to ask those questions and have those conversations, and be strong enough when you really believe that something is not in the best interest of the company, to be able to say that in a kind way, in a way that somebody hears it, because we're never at our best when we're on the defensive, when our ideas are, we feel like we're being shut down. And so it's like, how do you have that conversation and come to the agreement that, yeah, it's interesting, but maybe it's not the best thing for right now. And it's, there's a lot of strategy to that in that conversation. And it's funny because my master's degree had a focus on being the liaison between business teams and tech teams, because a business team, like a visionary entrepreneur, will come in and say, hey, we need this. And the tech
Yeah.
team says, okay. And they build you that. And then they come back a couple weeks later and go, okay, now make it do this. And that, well, we can't, because you didn't tell us that you wanted it to also be able to do that. I was like, wow, this is kind of the same thing as speaking leadership team and visionary. Like, it's that, it really is like a different language. And so understanding, when as a COO or an ops leader, when you come to the CEO, if they're that visionary type, and you come to them with a lot of details, they're just going to shut down and not hear you. And so it's, how do you present that? How do you set the stage? How do you condense things, but then provide backup if they want to dig deeper? So really understanding. And because, communication is a two-way street, and ideally both people are working on this, but really it's their company. You're the second in command, you're the ops leader. The more that we can do to make their life easier and make our life easier by understanding how they communicate and working with that, the better for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of nice to know that dynamic is, kind of, it's balancing, right? It's grounding the visionary. And then also for someone who's down, already grounded, it's more of just getting them to think about that big picture. So that's, a lot of great points there. Okay. So now you did mention in that last, with that last question that you have the boss or the CEO, the founder of the company, basically struggling to let go. So can we talk about delegation? So how do you get someone who feels like no one else will do the things that they do just as well? And have you worked with leaders like that? How do you help them shift that mindset?
Yeah, those are all great points, and that definitely happens. And usually it's because they've been burned before, something hasn't gone well, and sometimes it's nobody's fault. Often it's nobody's fault because, you're speaking different language, maybe you didn't hear each other well, they heard one thing, I experienced that. One time I got something back and I'm like, this is not at all what I asked for. And then I looked back at the email that I had sent asking them to do it, and I'm like, oh, I see where I wasn't clear. It was crystal clear to me because in my head, I had all this other info. And I see how, looking back, you can see how sometimes wires get crossed. And so a lot of times it's, it's due to something like that, but people get burned and they, or it's, it's their babies. This is what they've created. How do they let go? And what I a tool I like to use to help. It's my unload your workload experience, but they have them document like how they're spending their time for, at least 2 weeks. Because if you just do it for 1 week, you don't quite get enough. Or if you just say, sit down and write down everything you do, there's things that you'll miss because you don't even realize you're doing them until kind of into the day to day. And when they start looking at that and then see, okay, here's how I've spent my time for 2 weeks. And then you start to think about the things that didn't get done because you're spending your time this way. And then I do some classification. I have them let me know how badly they want it off their plate and how critical it is. Then I look at the types of tasks. And then we look at, so if you're the business owner and you're doing things that aren't critical to the success of the company, maybe those are some of the things that can start to come off your plate. We also start to talk about, does it drain you or give you energy? How proficient do you feel you are at it? And it was really hard for me as a, second in command who loves the details and wants everything to be working perfectly to let go sometimes too, to somebody and thinking that, maybe this is only going to be done, 80% as good as I would have done it. But when you really realize that other people have ways and you can still institute checks and balances so you're assured of that quality, and you can start delegating in pieces. You don't have to do the whole task all at once. You can delegate a piece of a task and let it go that way. And then that helps them not feel so out of control. And when they also start to see that the things that they really need to do to move their business forward aren't getting done, a lot of times, because the operations things are so tactical and it's easy to look at a list and go, I did all these things. I can check off all these boxes. That's harder to do with the strategic big picture work. Like, what is it? It's like, oh, I spent 2 hours thinking today and making note, like it doesn't feel like you've accomplished as much. That can make delegation hard.
Yeah. Now, you talk about this as well about, having clarity in the role of a COO. And if there's overlaps or there's gaps, it helps a little bit to define the roles so that go about that process of clarity of roles.
Yeah. And I like to start with the business owner because ultimately their preferences drive everything, as well as the stage of the company. Some other things come into play. But once we start to, unload their workload, figure out what they've got, see what needs to be handed off. That helps to start define the second in command's role. But then I would do the same process with them to help figure out what they're doing, because there are probably some things that they're doing that might not be the best use of their time, especially if you're going to start leveling them up to take on more of what the business owner is doing. So it helps you start to figure out those pieces. And in the entrepreneurial operating system, it's called the accountability chart, where you have everybody's role and their core responsibilities. I like to dig a little bit deeper because to figure out those core responsibilities, you have to really understand everything that somebody's doing. And in smaller businesses, you often have people filling multiple roles. And so once you start looking at what a person is doing and categorizing the tasks, you can start seeing what roles they're filling and then start breaking things out that way. So you have an understanding of, oh, I've got this person that's filling 2.5 roles and this person that's filling 2.5 roles. Maybe it makes sense to, shift some tasks, making sure, just trying to create that. And then it also helps you think about who needs to be brought in for hire as you grow. Like, what does it make sense to hire as you grow, and how do you want to do that growth strategy?
I see. Now, with we do also, I ready artwork. We do the accountability chart. I think it's a great tool. I agree with you because, I know it's also hard to just set some boundaries within a role, because then you kind of fall into like, oh, that's not my job mindset. But it's still good to see, where can I step in to help, even though this may or may not be part of this accountability role. And it also helps grow in that position as well. So maybe getting exposure to something that you typically wouldn't have had in the first place. But again, at the end of the day, that accountability is amazing and a great tool for businesses to use. And it's great to know that you suggest using it as well. Now,
Yeah, and I like what you said. It shouldn't be a constraining tool, but it's a get everybody on the same page tool. And then it also helps guide how people work together and people know who to go to for what. But you're right, that learning and expanding. And I think in some ways, by having those guardrails, it frees people to see opportunities and see ways they can be creative. And when they understand how their role meshes with other people's, it, invites collaboration, I think, in a lot of ways. And accountability, that term gets a bad rap sometimes.
I know it really does, but it's important. It's very
Yeah.
important. It helps, people, again, accountability at the end of the day is how you build a good team and how you build even just great leaders at the end of that day.
Yeah.
This is, great to know. And now I kind of want to go back to more of like someone aspiring to be an operations leader. So how do someone like me, I'm a project manager at Ready
Yeah.
Artwork. Right. I, try to look for moments of, hey, can I take care of that? Or can I maybe own that, step in here? But I want to understand from your perspective, how does someone try to build credibility to be considered for such a role?
Yeah, those are fantastic, fantastic points and fantastic questions. And um, you're right. I mean, project managers, you have those skills that you need to be a great CEO, COO. Like as you're growing, that is a great career trajectory, career path to be thinking about. And I would say there's a couple books that are really great to read. Traction or Rocket Fuel, which is part of the Entrepreneurial Operating System series. Rocket Fuel is all about the visionary and integrator, so that CEO, COO duo, and how they work together. And Second in Command by Cameron Herold talks about the different types of second in commands. He expands on an article from Harvard Business Review that has the 7 types of second in command COOs. And that sort of helps you see, like, oh, am I more of this integrator type where I like pulling everything together? And that's very much the EOS mindset. Or, is there another piece of it that I'm more drawn to? And one of the rare ones is that second in command who wants to transition one day into being a CEO and the full face of the company. But most second in commands have a variation of that behind the scenes. Some are more focused on growth, like they maybe have that sales background a little bit more. So it's really interesting to take a look at that article or the book, which is also great. And hopefully, maybe next year, hopefully it's going to come out next year. I'm working on a book about that dynamic and the relationship. And I'm going to be focusing a lot on communication skills and strategies that are going to help the two work together and just understanding, digging deeper into that relationship. But it's really looking at whoever your leader is, just constantly looking for how can I make their job, their life easier, better, what does that mean? And reading the EOS book, Traction's probably good too, because it's about the business operating system, but sort of understanding the different pieces of that, how they work together. But really, it's always, when I was coming up, it was like, start doing the job you want before you have it, and then you get promoted into it. And I think that kind of mindset shifted a little bit, but I feel like it's coming back a bit now. And it's just really being proactive and looking for those opportunities, really listening and understanding what's going on and coming from that place of helping and, things that you're seeing, but really sharing your insights because you do bring a valuable perspective that people in the leadership roles above you don't have. You're more in the ground, you're more in the details, and that's really valuable. And finding a way, I'd say a couple things are when you think something's being done the way it shouldn't be done, uh, finding a softer way to say it so people don't feel pushed into a corner or like their ideas are being attacked. So it's kind of like that yes and approach, because when people are feeling like they're attacked or sometimes they go into disrespected feelings or you aren't sure how somebody's going to take that on. And I think another thing to remember is that most of the time, people are usually mostly in their own world. Even as leaders, they're kind of stuck in it's just human nature. We're focused on what matters to us. And so sometimes I used to take things personally or feel like something that was directed at me that was never directed at me. They were in their zone, focused on what was happening with them. Especially when you get into those higher leadership roles, you're dealing with stuff that, the staff doesn't even know is happening. And so giving people a little bit more of that grace and just showing up and being positive and operating. And a lot of it too is operating from a place of what can we do moving forward? Because you can't change what happened. It's good to look at what happened and get lessons learned. I think that's a great thing too, always looking for lessons learned, opportunities to improve. But if something goes down, like you can argue and you hash it out, but it doesn't really matter. All what matters is how are we moving forward to make sure it doesn't happen again. And when people you work with, people you supervise, understand that you're coming from that place of, okay, it happened. How do we make it not happen again? How do we move forward? And getting their input and buy-in. It just, it's beneficial for the culture. It gives you more credibility as a leader just because you've got that forward focus and you're really looking at, okay, what's best for the company as we move into the next phase.
Hmm. Yeah, and speaking of culture, so I love how you mentioned that because, it is important for a team to be aligned and it helps run things a bit smoother as well. But, what are some ways that leaders can create a culture, where the structure and efficiency, everything's just more aligned for the team and it doesn't feel like it's preventing the company overall from growing from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, publicly showing respect and interest in the ideas that team members have, really creating that space where people can suggest things. And even if you're not going to do them, when people have the opportunity, like you're not ever going to be able to act on everybody's idea. But if everybody has a chance to share their idea, they're going to be more bought into whatever you choose. And providing some transparency. So if you get a bunch of ideas from somebody from your team and you're like, okay, appreciate the input. This is how we're going to go, work these things in, like helping people also understand why some things aren't going to work right now, but may be interesting for the future. It just helps them learn. So like if you see yourself as it's an opportunity to help them expand their understanding of the big picture of how things are working so that as they continue to come up with ideas, things will be more on target. I used to edit a lot. People would develop things for me and then I'd edit and I'd always try to explain why I was making certain changes or why I was taking things out to help them grow. Because your whole role as a leader is really to help your people that are coming up and feel like helping them really be part of it and expand it. I also love another strategy from the entrepreneurial operating system, which is quarterly conversations. And that's where you just have one-on-one conversations with individuals as individuals. And it's kind of like, yes, there's a work element to it, but you're really just trying to see how things are going for them and being vulnerable enough to ask, how can I help you? How can I better serve you in your role? What do you feel, and again, you're not going to be able to act on everything, but the fact that you're willing to ask and listen, that that gets you a lot of buy-in from your team. It really raises your um credibility in terms of that. And it builds a culture where people feel like they are respected and heard and understood. And that's just so powerful.
It's huge, hugely powerful, and you have a great point there about, usually it's the other way around, right? We're asking our leaders, "How do we help you? How do we support the bigger goal?" And I love how you mentioned you gotta turn that around and ask your team, "How do I help you?" So that's beautiful. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
they're
that.
experiencing things in a different way. And until you know how they're experiencing things, you know, it you just don't know.
It tells you a lot. It tells you a lot. You'll hear a lot from what you maybe haven't seen before from your team. They have, they're there in those blind spots that
Mhm.
just don't see. Now, you talked about your book, and I'm really excited. You said it's coming out possibly next year. I am definitely going to buy that. Use that. But For people who aren't, for when that time comes, until then, how can a business or an entrepreneur, reach out to you and learn more about your process? I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that, what it is to work with you?
Oh, yes. Thanks so much for asking. Yeah. So I have my ops success blueprint process that I work with companies through. And it really starts, like we talked about, with that role clarity and some one-on-one work with the business owner, CEO, to figure out, are the goals that they have written down still what they're headed towards? What do they want their life to look like? Is their role supporting that? What tweaks and adjustments do we need to make? And then starting to get them the support they need from their leadership team, using that information so it's really weaving in all the best practices from leading business operating systems, weaving those in, but in an incremental and gradual way. So instead of coming in and saying, we're starting with a whole new operating system, let's come in and see what you've got and how do we make that better? How do we strengthen your team around you? How do we get everybody clear on who's doing what, put some goals in place, figure out some leading indicators that we can track on a regular basis? And so as I work through that, my focus is on supporting the execution. So at the beginning, it's a little more intensive with the business owner making sure we're all in sync. Then it's just regular check-ins with them, but weekly support for that business or for their second in command to help them with that execution and help them, understand the different tools and things that are out there available to them. And just being able to have somebody who's been there, gone through it, understand some things that are out there to work through challenges with. And then I also have a peer group for second in commands where I keep each cohort really small. So up to 4 people in a cohort. So they get twice a month, get together, and everybody has time for what's important to them and working through their challenges. That's why I keep it small. And it's just 1 hour sessions because I know that to ask an ops leader to step away from their desk for 2 hours to do something is kind of freaks them out. So it's like, yeah, let's just do 1 hour, keep the group small, give everybody a chance to get some, direct support for whatever they're struggling with at the moment or questions they have or validation that they want and the opportunity to be that expert for others, which is also, really a lot of times when you're in that second in command role, you're kind of isolated, you're in between the rest of the staff and the business owner. So you don't have that sort of safe space to vent and or share things, be seen as an expert. So that's kind of one way that people work with me. And then I also have just like a standalone unload your workload sort of option where somebody can just like for a leadership team or the CEO, I like to start with the CEO, helps them get 5 to 10 hours per week back as we figure out what are some of the tasks that can be delegated and really start to clarify what only they can do, what they need to be doing, the stuff to move the business forward, whether as the business owner or leadership team member. And in terms of content, like you said, CEO World magazine, I've got articles featured there, and I'm posting regularly on LinkedIn with insights and strategies and things to help business owners and second in commands, stay uh, thinking about things differently, understanding strategies, things to help them move their businesses forward. And it's Diane Integrates for that because my last name's hard to spell. So my LinkedIn is if you do Diane Integrates, I've got a business page, but all the content's really happening on my personal profile.
Yeah, I follow you. Actually, I connected with you recently on LinkedIn, and it's almost every day that you're proposing or giving us some great tips. So definitely follow and connect with Diane. And like she mentioned, she is featured on CEO, the blog there as well.
Yeah.
I had one last thing to say. I just want to say thank you so much for joining this podcast. And my last question to you is, for our listeners, like what's one underrated but powerful operational tip that businesses could implement today and see some immediate benefits?
Oh, so great. Such a great question. And so I might have to come up with two, but I'm going to start with my easiest one that is so underused. And I really need to go back and look up what book I got this from, but it's called The Power Thank You. And it is when you thank people publicly, and specifically and timely. And so, and people expect to be thanked for the big things, but when you do that for the small things, so when you're in a staff meeting and you say, thank somebody for, the report they generated or getting something to you quickly, when you do it in front of others, it's so powerful for that person, for the rest of the team, really shows. So I think really it's like operating from a place of gratitude and being willing to express it. If you're not in a meeting, maybe you said, somebody gets you something and you do the reply all to say thank you, and you're specific about what you're thanking them for. And those thank yous for little things carry so much weight. And the reverse too, when you mess up, which we all do, apologize, own it. Let your team see that you're willing to say, you know what? I blew it on this and so pointed it out and I thought it, but just owning it and saying, hey, I'm sorry, guys, and same thing, how do we stay in that forward focused mindset and move forward? And just one other note on the thank yous, as a leader, be sure that you are looking for ways to thank everyone on your team, because if people feel you have a favorite and are only thanking them, that's going to derail the whole purpose of it. And when we look for the good, I guess this is the other thing that will get you benefits fast. When you look for the good in people, look for the good in situations, you're more likely to see opportunities, you're more likely to see good things happening. And then that's going to elevate the morale of your team. It's going to help you see more opportunities. And so those, other than role clarity, which is my favorite, but those are two little things that you can start doing right away that will make a difference.
Those are great. I mean, I think the listeners who are hearing this episode, I mean, I from someone who is I'm not a leader yet in this company, but the thank yous I value. Like I think back at the end of the day, like, oh, my boss said thank you for this. And, accountability, like you mentioned about owning up to mistakes, it's 100%. So how can you learn from lessons if you're not willing to say, hey, I messed up? So these are all, great points to close off this episode. And thank you again, Diane, for joining. I think our listeners are going to find all this information very insightful, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm going to challenge you on that you're not a leader yet, because the fact that you're doing this podcast and you're putting yourself out there and you're learning and growing, those are all qualities that leaders have, and you can be a leader in any role. You don't have to be in a leadership position yet, and as a project manager, you are a leader. So.
Oh. You're right. And thank you so much again. And I look forward to when this episode finally airs, but I appreciate your time. So you've been a great guest.
Thanks for listening to the Raw Spotlight podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.